Thank you very much for inviting me, first of all. It's a pleasure to speak at your event, and I hope I'm going to share with you some insightful information about Zaha Architects and how we work. And I'll start by sharing my presentation with you. And right, so as you just said, I'm part of Zaha Architects. We are an architecture firm which is based in London, and we have offices in Asia and the Middle East and in America and South America as well. We have approximately 400 staff with 50 nationalities and 45 languages. We are highly passionate about architecture and innovation. We have a dynamic team of dedicated and experienced professionals. Senior leadership is average of 15 years within Zaha Architects. And we are, as an office, arranged or organized into various sub-compartments, let's call them like this. And I myself am part of the so-called ZH cluster, which is the design cluster of the office. We are mostly in charge of design, in a sense that we provide initial sketches and ideas and design development for most of the projects in the office, and also follow the design development throughout all project phases up to completion. And I come from, as a background, I come from Romania initially, and I have studied in Romania and in Austria with Zaha in her studio at the Angewandte in Vienna, where I also had the pleasure of studying with some Russian colleagues as well. And then was asked to join the office back in 2014 by Zaha after finishing my diploma at the Angewandte. And since then, I've been part of this design cluster, which is also collaborating with all the other entities of the office, which are divided into all these acronyms, which do very interesting things. So we have a code cluster who is, let's say, specialized in computation, then sustainability, an agent-based modeling group. We have an analytics insight group, which provide data for user experience, virtual reality group, design technology. We also have formed the Zaha Hadid Design office, which is an independent firm from Zaha Architects. We have an interior cluster as well for all our interior projects, and also for designing the interiors of all our architecture projects which we design. And then we have the classical three clusters of the office who deal with, let's say, taking the projects through all the advanced stages of the design up to completion through building. So Zaha Architects has a diversified global portfolio.
Уменьшается хотя бы итог?
Sorry, would it be possible to mute? Thank you. We have a diversified global portfolio which spans all across the globe, from America, South America to Asia, and with most of the work in Europe and China. And China has become one of our leading markets recently, with a huge expansion in the building sector, and especially in important iconic buildings, which we specialize in. And we also have a vast breadth of expertise, with most building typologies being built throughout our range of projects. And the office was founded by Zaha Hadid in the 80s, and then together with Patrick Schumacher, they led the office up until 2016, when sadly Zaha passed away and Patrick became the office principal. But I'm going to take you into a small journey of how the office started and where we are and how we think about work and architecture in general. And I'm going to start with this image, which is, let's say, one of the most iconic or inspiring images for Zaha, in a sense that it represents an exhibition which the office did back in the 90s in New York at the Guggenheim, where it's called The Great Utopia, and it shows the Russian and Soviet avant-garde of the 1915 to 1932. And the Russian avant-garde was always a key inspiration for Zaha in her work, at least as a base for her creative adventures, let's say. So at the Guggenheim, what she tried to create is to basically, in an array of suspended work hanging in the space, a visitor could see and perceive in one go all the artwork, and all the collectors in the Russian world were there to witness the opening. And the spiral of the Guggenheim was used to create a story by the zigzagging play of the exhibition panels, which were used to orchestrate people's movement and the experience of the exhibition by taking advantage of the multiple perspectives one could see simultaneously, as you can see in this picture. And from there, towards that, also one of the most important works of Zaha was her graduation project from the AA, called The Horizontal Tectonic, inspired by Malevich Tectonic, which she painted in 1976 to 1977. This is exactly 45 years ago. For her graduation project at the AA, Zaha wanted to explore the mutation factor for the program requirements of a hotel on the Hungerford Bridge over the Thames in London. And the horizontal tectonic conforms to and makes use of the apparently random composition of the suprematist forms to meet the demands of the program and the site. The bridge links the 19th century side of the river with the south bank, which is dominated by the brutalist forms to meet the demands of the program and the site. The structure's 14 level systematically adhere to the tectonic, turning all the conceivable constraints into new possibilities for space. The project has particular resonance with the latter projects. First, in the Great Utopia show that I've just showed at the Guggenheim, in which Zaha has realized some of these tectonics in concrete form. And second, in the Habitable Bridge project, which considered a mixed-use development over the Thames, which she later did as a project in the office. Another project of Zaha's thesis at the AA, the Museum of the 19th Century, also in London, on the 19th century northern bank of the Thames, between 1977 and 1978. This is one of the first ideological and conjectural projects in which Zaha sought to establish principles for the role that architecture should play in cities at the end of the 20th century. She was particularly interested in the problems of historical and cultural context of the city. The archetype of the 19th century museum was thus explored in two ways: through elaboration of the precise social scenario of the metropolitan location, and through the display of a symbolic sensitivity. An aspect that appeared to be absent in the work of the contextualist architects at that time. And from there, she went on into exploring and trying to recreate and to create her own language, architectural language, through works such as The Peak, which was a competition won in Hong Kong in 1983. This was a competition for a social club at the top of the mountain behind the main bay in Hong Kong. And the particularly impressive, properties of this work is that she did not only solve the building itself, but provided almost as a master plan vision for the whole of Hong Kong in the representation of the city at the foothill of the peak. Continuing on with the early works of Zaha, the Tatlin Tower and Tectonic, which was called the Whirlwind in 1992 and 93, shows again how this obsession with Malevich and the Russian constructivist movement was pushing her to reinvent, and you can already see here a tendency towards fluidity and a breaking away from the rigid and rigor of sharp corners and 90-degree angles, and a spiraling tectonic articulation in shaping a vortex fluid world. And all of these obviously have then evolved into developing a radical new language in architecture, and I think it's well recognized throughout the architectural world. Zaha's contribution in revolutionizing the architectural language and scene. And I'm just going to flip through some of the projects which we have done in Russia, and starting with the Capitol Hill residence, which is an iconic project for the office, which has been done outside of Moscow. And the particularity of this project is that it sits within a forest, and all the living space is actually above the tree lines, because the owner, our client, wanted to feel like he has nothing around him, and he only wanted to see blue skies around. So when Zaha asked, yes, but do you realize that that means that you need to be on top of the tree lines? He said, yes, that's no problem. And the challenge was accepted. So just a few more images and the short animation of the project completed shows the daring nature of the projects and unstoppable thinking of boundlessness. Some of the other projects in Russia include the Dominion office space in Moscow, which has this exciting interior of multiplicity of stacking stairs, which make a spectacle out of this vertical circulation space. And the Sberbank Techno Park, which we are now building, with these incredible interior spaces organized around a multiplicity of atria, which provide for multiple connections and orientation space. The Philharmonic in Yekaterinburg, which we won in a competition, and the recently won metro stations in Moscow, which we hope are going to provide some new, exciting, and quality spaces for transport. How we think about projects and how we our work ethics and let's say ambitions are to design superior environments which are optimized for specific patterns of use. And we do that oftenly by simulation and prediction, by crowd modeling and spatial statistics. And why I'm showing that is because this is an important part of the work. And as most of our staff also work in academia, we then afford to inform our process by both a professional side and an academic side, which married together make the office thrive and be able to perform at the top of the game in our profession. So the way in which we think about the academic aspect is with a twofold approach. And we do that by gathering data and analyzing and simulating the data. And by that, I mean, similarly as in other fields such as football, people use sensing, movement, and behavior to analyze and make up for strategies in predicting the best outcome. In the same way as you are tracked every time you're using a website, and people look at how you move and then use that to predict where you will be more likely to look at on a web page so that they can place advertisement. In the same way as we use computation for improving farming, in detecting the best crop for us to have in the supermarket, in the same way we could use these technologies in architecture. And one of the built environment's contribution to society is ordering of social processes. And each territory, the space, is embedded within a semiotic context and organized as a system of signification, we believe. So our design should deliver the necessary information for us to be able to understand, navigate, and interact in and within them intuitively. In this sense, and for this, we use data gathering from places such as personal exhibitions, and this is one of our exhibitions where we tracked people's movement in space and tried to analyze where people spend the most time and in what sequence they visit the exhibition, and were able to understand what was the most precious piece in that space, so that when you recreate this or redesign an exhibition, then you would know if you would want to direct people in a certain place, you would place that special piece in a certain desired area. And in that same logic, we analyze our own offices to see what the environmental factors are for humidity, in this case, where we analyze the density in space throughout time during the day, the temperature in the office throughout the day, and then the CO2 levels that we have in the office. And we do that with our own offices, with our own employees, to be able to design then better spaces more fit for light, for example, and for quality use of the space. In a similar way, we analyzed our reception space in Bowling Green Lane in London, where we were tracking people's movement and tried to figure out which area of the space people would tend to move to, from, and where the destination most frequently is, and how much time people would spend there, in such a way to be able to extract this data and then simulate the environment and be able to cater for the desired use of space of people. And in the same way, we use our analytics insight team to be able to optimize floor plans, to better furnish them according to lines of sight, to natural light, to CO2 levels, to the core placement, to visual imparity, and so on. So these are some of the tools which we use. As this simulation shows you, we test which one is the optimal space and around the facade, and then what is the space left around that, and where that results in the best place where you could have internal atria to provide more light, and then further from that where you can place the cores. One other project which we developed in the office and with a collaboration between us and the University of Applied Arts in Vienna is called Agent-Based Parametric Semiology, which I'm also part of under the supervision of Patrick Schumacher. And this project was looking at exactly that, patterns of movement of people in space and how we can optimize our designs in such a way to increase, well, productivity and ultimately user experience. So we first looked at how we could do that, right? Because coming from architecture, one would wonder what are the tools that one could use. And we immediately thought of the gaming industry and went on into exploring what the gaming industry could provide us as a platform to do these studies. So we decided for using Unity and NetLogo, which is another software which is used more by scientists to do agent-based simulations. And these tools can allow us to, similarly as we saw before the video where we actually mapped the space in our office, in the same way we can then recreate this as a simulation, as an abstract simulation, and by using the data which we gathered from the actual capturing from our actual space, we input that as a parameter for the base of this simulation and see if people then behave, or our agents then behave in the same way or similarly to the people which were measured in the space. So that actually is the way in which we compare the two. And how we build this is by generating agent models, social models, and behavioral models, and then use these in conjunction to create a complex scene. And we run several simulations in which we then gradually increase the complexity of the scene, and we let the agents go into the scene and then have them have interactions between each other. And we run the simulation for as long as the agents have had the opportunity that each of the agent would be able to and have had a conversation with another agent. And when all agents have had a conversation with all other agents, the simulation would stop. And then we would analyze how much of the space was used, which area was used more intensely, and how the agents walked through that space. So in this way, we could determine which area of that space can be optimized, which area is redundant and it's not used as much by the agents in our simulation, and then compare, obviously, in this process with the actual measurement from the space. So we do that both in Unity and in NetLogo. And in NetLogo, we do that as a benchmark, let's say, system, because this is a more scientific software which gives us more realistic in such a way results. So you can see the graph at the bottom left of the screen in which you measure which agents are in conversation, which ones are walking, which ones are active, which ones are having conversations at a high table, at a coffee bar, at a low table, or at the meeting table, which are the different parameters in the scene. And then obviously we then summarize all of this in this matrix in which vertically we increase the complexity of the scene, and then horizontally we compare between different scenarios which we used in the scene arrangement. So for example, you have different arrangements of the tables or of the coffee bar or other elements in the scene going from left to right, and you have an increase in the capacity of the agent's brain from top to bottom. And then we use prediction methods at the end in the last part of the chart to the right, in which we compare the simulation to the prediction, which is a mathematical algorithm that doesn't simulate, but only predicts. And it generates the same visual information that then we can compare with the simulation and see if we can use actually prediction to skip the simulation and thus have a much faster result of what we are aiming to achieve. And also, obviously, benchmarking is a very important part. So we then count how many of these interactions have occurred and where they have occurred, and see which is the best performing layout out of the ones which we have conceived. So this helps us obviously to explore, evaluate, map, and then synthesize in our projects. And that we do in a similar way, not only for offices, but also for living spaces, in which our code group has been developing several different scenarios and strategies for living, for co-living, and how would that be in future scenarios where you, let's say, go for co-living spaces. What are the day cycles of people, how they would use the space, what are the opportunities for intersections and socialization. So then out of this, a tool was developed, which was almost as a menu where you would select how much space you would need and how you could inform that space architecturally by morphing geometrical elements. In the same way, we do these, we do all of these simulations, and all of this agenda is also tested at the AADRL in the studios led by Patrick Schumacher and Shajay Bhushan, which are part of the office and also integral parts of the school. So this is the place where these two worlds start to be married together, in the same way as the studio in Vienna did up to the end of 2015 when it ceased to exist. And this process we then try to apply in our projects, and through complex simulation, we then test various criteria, which we then test arrangements and see if they are compliant or not compliant to these parameters. And this is the way in which we tend to organize and research in our projects to be able to inform them better and to ultimately achieve more consistent, coherent, and pertinent results. And in the same way, we look at the city scale, and this is extracted from a project which we did back in 2017, and it was part of Walkable London, in which in this simulation we looked at the potential sites for housing densification within London's urban tissue. So there are three strategies derived from this, and one was the end of block strategy, where we would identify what locations would be suitable for densifying and adding to existing structures in such a way as to not disturb the park areas or the social areas around these developments, but rather look at the parts which were not optimally used by either buildings or the social space around them. And I'm just gonna skip through the simulation a bit quicker. So we identified these end of blocks and then did some generic design just to simulate and showcase how we could extend these buildings and provide for more space, as space for living in London is something essential, crucial, and in shortage, as everybody here knows. So this was one strategy. Then the standalone insertion in courtyards, where we figured that parameters which do not affect the existing buildings would then allow for you to densify, and then the temporary infill design strategy, which allows for temporary modular housing to be fitted. And these are all different strategies which the office speculates on, and this is one of the ways in which we tend to attract new work. And speculation is a very, very important part of our work and process. And as you can see in this simulation, we do look at how you can optimize building components and being inspired from an almost IKEA type of life, right? Where everybody goes shopping to IKEA because of the use of putting things together with ease. In the same way, we think of how you could modularize by creating exciting components that individually then can be assembled in a much bigger system, in a much more complex system that would still allow for richness and would give you a more flexible and a more affordable system to use. So from that, we also had looked at the urban scale, at the bigger scale, because the city is a very important part of our lives. And even outside of this pandemic, I think people will still want to live in cities. And in London, living spaces are highly dependent on the employment location and density. So we looked at and analyzed of how people use space, and also based on their social media happy sentiment, let's say, and total posts and commercial diversity and density. So all of these to be able to then propose pedestrianization of streets in London, in central London, based on the concept of the 15-minute city. So we have created this simulation to reimagine London as a pedestrian, bicycle-friendly city, which would put the person in the center stage and get rid of the car as much as possible and rely on public transport. So this was our study for walkable London. And yeah, I hope these, yes, I'm just about done. I hope this I hope this presentation was somewhat insightful, and hope not too much information, but just wanted to give you an overview of how we work and what we work on. And yes, thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bogdan, for such an exciting and fantastic presentation. You led us through Malevich to walkable London. It was really exciting journey. So thank you so much for it. We have actually lots of questions for you in the chat. So I will probably right now will give the floor to these questions and start with the first one, which is concerning the strategy which you have in your agency and how it depends on the views and the needs of the client. So in other words, do you adjust your mission, which you've showed us on the very first slide, for the needs of the client, or it's like your obvious rule that, guys, we work like this, and sorry, we won't work in any other way?
Well, I think, yeah, that's a very good question, and I think that is a common kind of, let's say, misunderstanding from my point of view of the architect's role and their mission. And I think that the client should always have the greatest contribution, in a sense that ultimately the client is the one who comes with the request. So we only show our expertise and modus operandi in a sense of how we go about approaching work, but is fairly generic in a sense that, as it is very specific, it's also highly generic in a sense that it could be applied to any kind of project and to any kind of scale. And I think that is the beauty of working with parameters and working in such a flexible way, because you can actually accommodate any kind of need and any kind of wish by giving the most pertinent response that you can.
Thank you, Bogdan. So the next question also comes from Valeria, and she asks if you how do you actually count the daylight in your environment, and do you work with separate light design studios, or do you have light designers in-house?
Well, there are different strategies because I think there's a different quality which you can measure, in a sense that you could measure the existing parameters, the natural environmental parameters, which we have the capacity to do in-house with our environmental team. And then you then can look at the specifics of a design proposal, which has to do with artificial lighting, right? And obviously, when you deal with artificial lighting, then consultants come on board, because we are architects and we do not have the expertise of providing pertinent answers to what type of artificial lighting one would need to apply to their project. But as architects, we do have the tools nowadays to be able to analyze the environment and the given conditions of the site, and to see what are the opportunities to use natural light, right? And to design towards a more sustainable environment.
Right. Thank you so much, Bogdan. I will just translate your answer right now, because it seems like we turned off the translation. So Богдан сказал, что все зависит от случая к случаю по поводу вычисления объема естественного света в помещениях. И они по-разному работают на разных проектах, но он говорит о том, что архитектор, естественно, что у световых дизайнеров есть свои инструменты для подсчета, и в принципе, это не задача архитектора говорить, какое именно искусственное освещение нужно использовать, в каком объеме в их проектах, но в задачах архитекторов и в инструментарии архитекторов есть некоторые области, которые могут покрыть именно архитекторы. И в первую очередь это связано с использованием естественного освещения, так как чем больше мы используем естественного света, тем более экологически безвредные наши проекты. И это во власти архитекторов, и это то, на что они уделяют большое внимание. Bogdan, we will have probably the last question. We have lots of cheerful thank you messages in the chat, but the last question would be also from Valeria. Who was your consultant on the Russian projects, and who helps you to adapt the lighting and design for the building in Russia?
Right. So on our Russian projects, some of them are confidential, like the villa and other things, so I cannot really say too much about it. And the Sberbank one, which is now under construction, is also something which is running in stages. So I'm not entirely sure which one of the consultants is, specifically on that project for. I mean, it's a very, very targeted question, so I don't really have a precise answer for that, unfortunately.
All right. All right. Thank you so much. So the guys are sending you thank you in the chat, and it was really great to see you once again. And I hope you have a lovely evening in London. So thank you so much for sharing this inspiration with us.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.